one shot of rain Wednesday over the next 10 days, and that's more like a shower potentially than a front coming through to bring us 2 inches.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock Channel. I'm Marlon Bowling with you. Always glad to have you with us. And just want to remind you before we get into today's episode, make sure you like these videos, subscribe to the videos. How do you do that? Well, you just click on that little bell icon down below, and we'll let you know every time we post a new update. And also make sure that you share these videos with friends, relatives, anybody who might be interested in our ag stories. My gosh, thanks to your help, we are one of the fastest growing ag-related podcasts out there anywhere, and it's all thanks to you. Today, my very special guest is Ben Hushon. My goodness, Ben and I have worked together for many years. He has done remote reports for me when I was at RFD TV, and I wanted to call on Ben, who happens to be a partner with a company called The Mill. He's in Whitehall, Maryland. Let's talk about, Ben, the situation with the corn in that part of the country. I've been doing reports in the western part of the Corn Belt, talking about how it flooded. I've been doing reports in the central part of the Corn Belt, where it's ideal. I mean, they're talking about probably record crops there this year. You are in the far eastern part of the Corn Belt, and you and several other people that I know and am related to as well actually have been talking about how dry it is there. All right, so you're out standing in the cornfield right now, and talk about what you're experiencing for the corn crop here in 2024 in that area. By the way, Maryland can crank out some really good corn, in case our viewers are wondering. So, what's the situation there? I see you have an ear in your hand there, Ben.
I do, Marlon, and certainly have had a pretty decent year up until we started to get a little worried in June. June, we had above average temperatures, pretty typical 4 or 5 degrees above average. But the bigger concern is we had an inch and a half of rain and I'm in northern Maryland, close to the Pennsylvania line on the east side, closer to kind of between Gettysburg and Philadelphia. But this is pretty typical for a widespread area among multiple counties and actually including both states that we're in. We had about an inch and a half of rain June the 5th. The next rain we had was an inch and a half on June 30th. We are now 2 weeks beyond that and have had zero rain since then and continue to be. We've kind of ratcheted it up now that we moved into July. We're running into 90, 95. In fact, this afternoon and tomorrow, they're talking about 95 to 98 degrees out here in the country, not in the city, but actually right out here in the country. And for the folks that are watching this, you can see corn has started to tassel. This particular field would have started about a week ago. And as most of the listeners and viewers know, pollination happens ideally in a 60-degree, 65-degree nights, high of 85 during the day. Well, we're only dropping back into the upper 70s, maybe on a cool night, 75, since most of this tasseling has begun. And you can see, certainly the loose anthers that are dropping pollen down on the silk. And you can actually see some of the pollen still laying on the corn. And we just have a lot of concern, Marlon, about we were set up for pretty decent yields. The other thing that you can notice is the lower leaves, not just that they're all curled up, but they have started to dry up. So this corn is pulling moisture. It normally would do this in October around here. So this corn would have been planted the first week of May. Typically for us, we are going to tassel at about this July 5th through the 15th range, but we're not used to getting zero rain from these multiple opportunities that have come through. And again, talked to some friends down on the eastern shore of Maryland, and they're telling us very same situation. In fact, they would tell me this is tremendous corn because I've gotten pictures in that waist to chest high corn field corn in full-blown tassel. I don't have any here, but we've also been hearing in our community where the tassel has come out. These come out together. Normally, you're going to find the tassel and the silk coming out at the same time, but in this case, not in this field, but very nearby, we have tassels without any corn. That tassel drops pollen arguably for 7 to 10 days. So if you're out of sync, you miss the chance to pollinate. Again, 800 to 1,000 pieces of silk, a couple of million chances per stalk. But when they get out of sync, I mean, there's a reason the good Lord put that many up there, because it's not an easy process. And right now, extreme heat, the stress of dry weather, has really got folks concerned about what's this going to look like, how much of this is going to pollinate over the next 5 to 7 days that might be remaining.
If I recall correctly from my farming days, agronomically speaking, when those silks come out, I'm trying to remember, they're only viable for what, 72 hours before they dry up and they can't pollinate anymore?
Right. So they become available for pollination in phases. Generally, and I should have peeled this on down, generally what happens is the first silks that come out are the ones that are going to be attached to the bottom. So that's why sometimes at harvest, farmers will find they've got very little corn here pollinated, but then it looked really good the rest of the way, or vice versa. But you're correct. When that silk first starts to come out, it kind of moves its way up through. About 72 hours is generally, and again, that's kind of in an ideal situation. Now we're not in severe drought, but we're certainly in mild drought, and it's that double whammy. I don't think the moisture concerns me as much as the heat piled on top of the moisture for this season.
We're actually recording this just about noon hour Eastern time, where Ben is. And Ben, if we would give this another 2 or 3 hours, would that corn be rolled up today?
It would absolutely be rolled up. You can see it showing signs since about 9 a.m. this morning Eastern time. Um, the leaves, those leaves should be flat out, and they are flat. And then the next step, as you mentioned, is they're going to just continue to get tighter and tighter and pipe, some people call it, essentially just curl up into a circle upon itself, trying to um, protect the moisture that plant has. When you get into this stage where you're shooting out an ear and tassel, that's also the time of this corn plant's life that it needs the most moisture out of the soil. And we're speeding it up. So tassel pollination window can be as long as 10 days. Some will tell you 8 days in many cases. But when you run into these repeated heat spells, what happens is you suddenly shorten that. Everything happens much faster, and suddenly it's 5 days from beginning to end in some cases. And again, it isn't going to be zero yield, but my golly, we're losing yield every day in this community right now.
Now, I know there have been some heavy rains in different parts of the eastern seaboard. I know New England, they had some heavy rain. I believe parts of North Carolina had flooding this past weekend, but I just wondered how large of a geographic area we're talking where you're having stress symptoms like what you're showing there.
I think I'd very comfortably say at least a dozen counties in Maryland, and I'd rather understate than find out later it's 17 counties, because there's going to be some viewers and listeners from the East Coast that go, you totally forgot about me, or you didn't think about that. But it would be probably the other thing to say without offending anybody is probably in the core, in the high yield parts. Again, this part, so I'm on the west side of the Great Chesapeake Bay, and there's virtually no irrigation over here because we have plenty of soil moisture holding capability, so that the payback, we always get rain. Let's just put it that way. 4 to 6 inches in the month of June is typical. July, again, somewhere around on average, that's 6 inches. And sure, you'll miss the beginning of the month, but you'll catch later in the month. And but in this case, this year, it's a much wider footprint on this side of the bay, and this is a cornfield that very routinely, through a lot of work and today's hybrids, and this farmer, the Miller family, does a really good job. This would easily be a 210, 220 corn yield in a good year like 2022 and 23 were very strong years in this area. So we're not talking about folks who always struggle. I could take you not too far from here, up into Pennsylvania, and show you some heavy clay soils where, my golly, it's only perfect to plant for about 4 days a year. And there's then all the weather issues start. It's too wet, too wet, too wet, too dry, too dry, too dry. That's not the case here. These are beautiful silt loams that can really put out some good corn.
So as the corn right behind you, as it stands right now, if you had to guess, what's the maximum you think it could crank out this year?
Oh, I'm an optimist, or I certainly wouldn't be in agriculture, Marlon. But I don't think I'd be booking. I wouldn't be booking much over 150 bushel. I mean, it's so. And here's the other piece: the long range forecast. We have a 40% chance in the next 10 days. A 40% chance. Now, that can change, weather can change. This field I'm standing in, we could have a thunderstorm move in Wednesday. So there's a cold front coming. So we could have a storm move in here Wednesday, and we could get an inch and a half here. The concern I have is how far along this process is, because again, the window is getting shorter, and every day as I drive to work or drive out to see somebody, I see more fields starting to come in tassel. This would have been a great year, potentially a better year for folks who would have planted later, but statistics and data will show you planting in late April, 1st of May in this community typically gives us the best yields. Because again, it's a rare day that I would be out here in July talking about lack of rain. Hot maybe, but not lack of rain.
That ear that you're holding in your hand, is that kind of an average size in that field behind you? It just doesn't appear like it's that big.
It's not that big. We also have a very strong population. As I look at, so I did step in 2 rows to get this because I didn't, just because you were putting me on the camera, I didn't want to show you the worst field on the corner where the deer ate half of it. But I stepped in a couple rows. This is a very typical ear in this field, but we're also looking at, shouldn't do this without counting, but that is clearly 32,000 plus population on a 30-inch row. So, and it doesn't look, it looks like, again, we had good emergence this year. Beans were horrible emergence, but corn came out of the ground quickly. And I'm not seeing a skip as far as I can see, other than this row I'm standing in here, which looks like behind the camera, they took off wheat, and it looks like maybe somebody might have driven on just a little section here. But looking into the rest of the field, to answer your question, that's a very typical ear. Has 16 round, so it has potential. And again, the season's not over, but behind the camera, somebody had taken off wheat. Looks like they drove on part of this row. But this is pretty typical. And the discussion, Marlon, we're having now, tassel time. Think about what happens then. We now have tar spot for the last 3 years in our community. There's always going to be some gray leaf spot, although I should have prepped before we started. I don't see any at the moment. But the decision on flying on fungicide is right now. So then the discussion is, by the time you add application, you're at $65 an acre. Do I want to add another $65 an acre to fields that are beginning to look like that with the 10-day forecast of one shot of rain Wednesday over the next 10 days? And that's more like a shower potentially than a front coming through to bring us 2 inches.
Well, for the benefit of our viewers, Ben, the mill happens to be a farm supply outlet. You guys carry fertilizer, chemicals, the whole nine yards, right? You do field
Yep.
scouting and
Yes.
application and that sort of thing.
Yep.
But given the way the market is and everything has just really fallen off a mountainside
Hmm.
here price wise, has that led producers to really cut back on their inputs they want to apply to the crop this year?
It was interesting, Marlon. We've been preparing for that. So we worked harder this winter. So we're family owned. Two families that own myself and the Holloways that own this business, and we certainly credit is a big deal. Dollars keep getting bigger with all the inflation of everything in society today. And for us, we started looking in December at credit, assuming people were going to need help in that space. And of course, interest rates have climbed 8, 9%. And when we looked at it, we thought, okay, we're going to sell less fertilizer at pre-plant, because in our community there's no nitrogen. Chesapeake Bay, I mentioned earlier, there's no nitrogen put out in the fall. It's all done pretty much March 1st on. So pretty big slug of money gets spent. And we didn't see any cutback on nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium in any significant way. The herbicides put down early. We didn't see anybody cutting any corners, but as it came time to respray corn and soybeans, we started hearing some of that. Do I need to spray all my fields? Do I need to do that? And then when it came time for tassel application, so we have a couple drones. It's hard Google Earth where we're at, Whitehall, Maryland. You'll see lots of population, and so we've gone the drone route, and that list is very short. And talking to some of our friendly competitors who also offer helicopters, they're saying the same thing, that guys are just looking at fields like this, going, and markets as you described and know way better than I do, and say, I'm not sure the ROI is there to apply again with application, ballpark $65 an acre with $3.90, $4 corn.
All right. Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate the update from the eastern part of the Corn Belt, the far eastern part, along the eastern seaboard. That's Ben Hushon of The Mill in Whitehall, Maryland, joining us, and that'll do it for this episode. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlon Bowling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock Channel. Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.